Welcome to Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy. So a while back I was rewatching Shang-Chi. I'm amazed at how good this movie is. It has outstanding action, interesting characters, and a really solid story. But then I got to the battle at the end, and suddenly the big CGI demon dragon showed up, completely ruining what was shaping up to be a fantastic and emotional culmination of this story. And then it hit me. This is kind of a problem, isn't it? And not just with Shang-Chi, this is an issue that plagues so many MCU movies.
Big CGI fight coming up!
The big battle at the end has always been a hit and miss. Now at times, it's the perfect climax, a great mixture of style and substance. But there are way too many MCU movies that end with an overblown, loud, and messy CGI third act. It's as if there's some sort of mandatory requirement for the third act to be this bombastic main event, a spectacle for the sake of being big.
Bigger. And bigger is better.
Many times, these climaxes completely ignore the characters' arcs or the emotional culmination of their stories. It's a strange habit, one that's become the MCU's biggest Achilles heel. It's a problem with most of Marvel's 2021 movies and even with some of their shows. And it's so baffling that it keeps happening because the MCU always improves and gets better on so many other aspects of their films. But the third act problems keep coming up time and time again, and it hinders some of the best movies in the franchise.
We're trying to solve a problem here, Billy.
Not like this, you're not. You're not even looking at the problem.
We're very aware of the problem.
Okay, good. What's the problem? We got to think differently.
Now to make it clear, my issue here is not with big battles and spectacles. There is nothing wrong with spectacle. It's only natural that superhero movies will have a lot of spectacle and action, especially in the third act. Some of the best superhero movies end with a big battle. The problem here is the execution of these big battles and their connection between the hero's story and the movie. Another problem is how mandatory these big climaxes have become, as if a superhero movie isn't complete without a big climactic main event. But every story needs its own distinctive culmination, and that's where the issue lies. Too many of the MCU's movies tend to ignore this, giving us big climaxes regardless of what the story actually needs. This is why I choose to use Shang-Chi as an example. Not because it's a bad movie, because it's not. It's really good. But it does illustrate this problem very well.
And I'm hanging out of the Great Protector with my sister at this point, trying not to get eaten by the Mega Soul Sucker.
Oh, the Mega Soul Sucker was such a nasty bitch.
Yeah, I was trying to eat her dragon's soul.
Which would have allowed it to destroy the entire universe.
Yeah.
Shang-Chi is a story about a family conflict. The fractured relationship between Shang, Zhu Jialing, and Wenwu creates an emotional family drama. And that is a recipe for a great story. The movie masterfully crafts the complicated relationships between Shang and his father, revealing their past slowly through flashbacks, and this builds toward a powerful conflict leading to an emotional culmination. At the end of Act 2, Shang decides that in order to stop his father, he must kill him.
I'm gonna kill him.
And this is a crucial moment in his arc. It's a strong conflict leading into the final battle. Will Shang kill his father or find another way? When Shang faces his father, it's visceral and intimate, as both father and son are trading blows while trading blame for Ying Li's death.
You stood at a window and watched her die.
Even if you could bring her back, what makes you think she'd want anything to do with you?
It's done really well, and the fight itself is fantastic. The choreography and martial arts are spectacular, and I love the clever way they use the 10 rings. So up until that point, the fight is emotional and powerful, and then the big giant demon dragon shows up, ruining what was shaping up to be an incredible climax.
Why would you do that?
The fight between Shang and Wenwu is everything we needed, an epic climactic duel between two incredible martial artists, an emotional father and son conflict. This is a movie about martial arts, and this final battle was meant to parallel the beautiful fight between Wenwu and Ying Li at the start of the movie. This is basically the same as Luke clashing with Vader in Return of the Jedi, and could you imagine if that duel would have ended with the Emperor turning into a giant monster? It would have been terrible. No! The last thing this movie needed was for a big CGI battle against the dragon that wants to destroy the world. There was already a powerful conflict at play.
You trained your son to be a killer. Is this what you wanted?
And by the way, this is another terrible habit the MCU has, putting the world in peril when there's really no need for it. Sure, the world or even the universe can be at risk from time to time, especially in big movies like Infinity War. But it seems like the world is always in peril, which is supposed to raise the stakes, but in actuality, it just lowers them. I mean, what emotional conflict does Shang have with the evil dragon?
You killed my father. Prepare to die.
There's nothing personal at stake here, just the mandatory heroic urgency to save the world. This could have been the story of any MCU hero. but what we don't know is how Shang will stop his father. That is a far more interesting question to answer, and there are so many emotional stakes for our hero in this conflict. Personal stakes are always higher than these superfluous ones. It is honestly baffling to think that Marvel decided that Wenwu, an incredible and fascinating villain, was not enough for this climax, that for some reason we needed a CGI demon.
You blew it! You had it all and you blew it!
A far more interesting direction would have been if they just cut out the Dweller in Darkness entirely. Wenwu already wanted to find Ta Lo at the start of the movie. So maybe he learns that he could bring his wife back to life in some other way, like using the rings in Ta Lo. But there's a price. If Wenwu brings Jing Li back to life, then Ta Lo will be destroyed. This adds so much more depth to the conflict between Shang and Wenwu, and it brings up the stakes for how it will end. Will Wenwu see the error of his ways thanks to Shang, or is he too far gone and the son will have to kill the father? Instead, the conflict never reaches a true conclusion, because the big dragon shows up to ruin this incredible moment.
I have to save her. She's calling to me.
I wish that were true. Dad, please. Your family needs you.
Wenwu gets a rushed redemption, and the rest is just window dressing to give Shang his big hero moment. It's an empty conclusion. Now that being said, I'm not gonna lie, seeing Shang and Zhu Zhilang resolve their fractured sibling relationship in that moment makes up for most of this.
I'm not leaving you again.
And seeing them team up and defeat the Dweller in Darkness was pretty badass. And maybe this was Marvel's thought process. Do something that will give their characters heroic moments and a crowd-pleasing ending. But to be clear, I'm not suggesting that Marvel shouldn't do big battles. There's nothing wrong with big action and spectacle. It's one of the reasons why I love these movies so much. In fact, there's this expectation that these movies will always end with a spectacular action scene. This is the perception that started with the Avengers. Ever since that movie, there's this need to keep replicating that climax. And the Avengers' big battle was awesome. It's a masterpiece of a third act, but that climax matches the tone and story of the movie. Marvel structured the story of the Avengers in a way where the movie needed to end with an epic team-up. The third act of any story needs to be a culmination of the previous two acts. It needs to fit the tone of the overall story and the characters' journeys. But not every MCU movie needs to end on a big climactic battle. It's all about what the story needs the third act to be. Some MCU movies have benefited greatly from a much smaller and more personal climax. And this is why the climax of The Winter Soldier was so perfect. The spectacle was done right and fit the tone of the movie. But the actual emotional conflict always stayed on Steve and Bucky, and that was the powerful culmination of the story.
You're my friend, because I'm with you to the end of the line.
This is also why Civil War works so well, because Marvel understood that the culmination of the conflict between Steve and Tony was the true climax. Doctor Strange is another great example of a movie that understood that it didn't need a big battle at the end. It culminates in a verbal conflict.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
As Strange was able to save the world with words instead of shooting lasers from his hands. But these movies feel like the exception, the few times where Marvel was willing to take a risk. The rest sort of feel like the climax is this mandatory big CGI battle that usually has very little to do with the hero's journey or serving a truly satisfying culmination to the story. Take Black Widow, for example. It was set up as a spy action thriller, but the ending simply doesn't correlate with the most important aspect of the movie, the family story. For some unexplained reason, the final act takes place on a flying base, which of course blows up at the end, probably to mimic the final battle in Winter Soldier. So we get a weightless CGI sky battle as Nat fights bad guys while flying through the air. It's just a giant computerized mess. And what purpose does it actually serve? How does this satisfy Nat's story? This movie needed a personal and intimate climax where the family could reconcile and work together as a team. Instead, they all just do stuff. And the final confrontation between Nat and Taskmaster ends up feeling like kind of a waste in the end. And it's because the movie got way too distracted by the spectacle, which hurt the emotional story they were trying to tell. And then there's The Eternals, another movie that would have benefited from a far more personal culmination. The family conflict is at the center, just like Shang-Chi and Black Widow. Icarus ended up being a fascinating villain, very much like Wenwu.
Do you think it was easy to live with the truth? To know that one day all this would end? To keep on lying to you?
And that should have been the focal point, but the climax is all over the place. For example, Crow shows up at some point, pretty much reminding us that he's still part of the movie.
We forgot him.
If it makes you feel any better, I forgot my reading classes.
And he felt completely out of place, like an afterthought, a mandatory villain that outlived his usefulness to the plot in Act 2. In the end, it's all about the execution. And it's not just a movie issue. Take WandaVision, for example. The show was brilliant, and it was building toward an emotional and personal conclusion. And yet again, the final episode is the big battle, which this show didn't need.
But what is grief? If not love, persevering.
On top of that, there's the ugly atmosphere of so many climaxes, where there's this overbearing grayish blue and green tint with a lot of smoke and mist in the background. It swallows all the other colors, making everything look too dark and ugly. And it also makes the CGI stand out a lot more, looking a bit fake, showing that all of these actors are standing in front of green or blue screens. And this isn't just a problem with the MCU, it's something that's been plaguing so many recent blockbuster movies. So let's use Shang-Chi as an example. Shang-Chi is a beautiful movie for the most part, but at some point the color grading of the climax becomes so dark and messy. And this is so strange because Ta Lo is a gorgeous place, full of lavish green and gold. Just look at the beautiful fight between Wenwu and Ying Li. Why can't the climax have had the same color scheme? There are so many other ways to convey that dark atmosphere of the climax without the need to make everything look ugly and dark.
Wait, no, stop! What in the actual ass? Dale, why are the visual effects not done? It's a metal arm. It's not like we're trying to remove a mustache.
And this isn't a CGI problem. Well, okay, it's a bit of a CGI problem, but it's more about how the CGI is used. Visual effects are an essential tool in making these movies. There's nothing wrong with CGI. The issue here is that the MCU relies on CGI way too much. CGI needs to support what's going on screen, not become a distraction. Take the two fights between T'Challa and Killmonger in Black Panther. Both scenes were filmed on a blue screen, but one looks amazing while the other feels really fake, especially in contrast. The third act battle takes place in a dark blue mine. Everything is CGI, even T'Challa and Killmonger, and the CGI becomes far more apparent and distracting. It's much harder to care about what's going on in the scene because the CGI is taking you out of the story. Now, the waterfall duel doesn't suffer from these same issues, despite being filmed mostly the same. The CGI is there, but it's not overbearing. It's in the background, not pulling focus from the important characters.
On my films, I try to shoot as much in camera as possible. On Interstellar, we didn't use any green screens. We produced all that material and we shot it and achieved the effect in camera.
So, big question, why does this keep happening? Well, director Lucrecia Martel gives us some insight. She said this about her experience with the MCU, that when Marvel approached her to direct Black Widow, they said, don't worry about the action scenes because the studio was going to take care of them. And this is what ultimately made Martel turn down Marvel. Each director has their own style and approach, and for their vision to be brought to life, they need to be able to work on the whole film, including the action scenes. If directors take a step back from the action, then those scenes are made by people who have a separate vision and style, which is how we get muddied third acts that feel separate from their movies. Now, the reason Marvel says we'll handle the action scenes is because of pre-visualization. Previs means that Marvel maps out the scenes in animated form. This way, the filming process can be much easier as there's a blueprint the production can follow. Previs is used for pretty much every big movie, but Marvel is known for using Previs to map out huge chunks of their films, at times every scene in the movie. And Previs is a great tool because there's a lot of money on the line, and having Previs allows everyone to be on the same page and prepare better for the filming process. And it gives everyone a cohesive vision of the finished movie. But Marvel sometimes uses Previs to map out movies before they even have a finished script, or before they hire a director. Because there's so much at stake with these massive films, the studio feels like they have to play it safe.
Hit that director in the face. Really f***ing hard. Oh, ow, ow. This is your fault. You limey f***. You shit the money bed, my friend.
If they already mapped out their third acts with Previs, then why not just stick to it for better or worse, even if that Previs was made long before the script was written. Now, it's unclear how often this happens, but this method of filmmaking could explain what went wrong with the climax of Shang-Chi. If Marvel had a previs of a big dragon before they finalized the story, then they probably decided to stick to the previs no matter what, because this method has worked for them in the past. These third acts are Marvel's biggest Achilles heel. They keep trying to break free from the superhero movie stigma, but these third acts put them right back in the same box they're trying to break free from.
Life is about growth, it's about change, but you seem to just want to stay the same.
So hopefully the MCU will recognize these problems, learn from them, and adjust their filmmaking methods to create much better third acts. But what do you think about the MCU's third acts? Which ones do you like? Which ones do you hate? Let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Eric.